in an amazing way, a life-changing way. But this morning we're going to be in Luke 17. We're going to kind of piggyback off last week. Last week we talked about prayer and how that we have this need to continually pray and not lose faith. That we should pray, and when God doesn't answer immediately, that microwave moment that we're looking for, that we should continue just to ask God for those things, to not become discouraged, I think is how he puts it as we were reading it last week. But this need to pray always and not become discouraged. And I think if we were honest, for most of us, like that's a hard thing, right? Like we've prayed things before, and it doesn't seem like God's coming through, and it doesn't seem like He's coming through, and it doesn't seem like He's coming through, and eventually we just quit asking, right? We just think, man, God doesn't care. We believe the lies that He's left us, that we're alone, that we're forgotten. And I think for most of us, if we were honest, which, who knows this morning, but if we were honest, we would say, I've been there. Maybe today some of us are there. Maybe some of us are sitting in that moment right there where we're like, I've asked and I've asked and I've asked, and I just feel like God doesn't hear me. I feel like He doesn't care. I feel like He's left me. And last week, what Jesus instructed us to do is to not let our circumstances define who our God is, but to let God define who God is. That today, even if we're waiting, even if we feel like we're in the pit alone and forgotten, we can believe this truth, that our God still loves us and He is still for us, not against us, that He is a good God today. Whatever we're going through today, whatever we're sitting in today, that God is still good and God is still in charge and God still loves us, and He's working today, not against us, but for us. Just like Romans 8 would say, all things work together for the good of those that love Him. Not all things are good. Some of us are in situations right now where we're like, I would rather not be in this. And it's okay to admit that. Not all things are good. This life is just not designed that way, right? There's sin in the world. The world is not what God intended it and created it to be, and not all things are good. But in all things, even the bad things, we can trust today in God because He's good and He loves us, that He's working everything together for our good and His glory. And I love that truth that we talked about last week. And this morning, we're just going to maybe use that as a diving board as we continue to talk about prayer in Luke 17. And maybe you're like, I've read Luke 17, I was just skimming it as you were talking, and I don't see anything about prayer in there, and that's okay. But this morning we're going to talk about a story of 10 lepers, and it starts about verse 11. It's found in Luke. Now, if you're not familiar with Luke, Luke is the Gospel of Luke, and what that basically means is the narrative story of Jesus' life and ministry as told by Luke. And if you know anything about the disciples, maybe you're clipping down in your head and you're like, Matthew, Mark, Matthew and John and Bartholomew and Thomas, and then you're like clicking through the guys, and you're like, Luke, I just don't remember that one. I don't remember Luke being a disciple. And the thing is, he's not at least one of the 12. He was the guy that came along maybe kind of second generation after the death and the resurrection of Jesus, but he was a guy that followed Jesus, that knew the 12. And if you read kind of back at the beginning of Luke, what you see is this book, this letter, was intended to be a compilation of eyewitness accounts in the most orderly fashion he could get them in of the life and ministry of Jesus. So even though Luke maybe was not there for all of these things and didn't see all these things, he was speaking to people who were there for all these things and were speaking to those things. And you're like, why does that matter to me? And I just want you to know today, like, God is not afraid of you to dive into the reality of His Word. That this substance that we're looking at today, like people have tried for 2,000 years now to discredit this book, and they're still not doing it. And there's been people, I don't know, maybe nobody's been smarter than you, but there have been people smarter than me, and nobody's been able to discredit this thing. And I've looked into it, and I've researched it, but we believe this lie sometimes that this book was written like hundreds of years after the death and the resurrection of Jesus. And if you ever played that telephone game, that things have been changed and moved, and maybe it's just not accurate. And I want you to know today, this word we can count on. This word is accurate today. We can believe it because people were standing there seeing Jesus do these things, and these accounts that we have are from those people. And I love that today. Before we look into it, we don't have to check our brain at the door today. God wants us to love Him with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I love that. So I just want you to know today, you can research it. If you're a skeptic, you can look it up. You can dive into it. But this word we can trust in. And the Gospel of Luke in 17 tells the story of these 10 lepers, and we're going to just dive into that today. In verse 11, it says, while traveling to Jerusalem, he passed between Samaria and Galilee. So Luke, being the details man that he is, kind of sets the stage for us this morning before he jumps into the story, and he wants us to know what's going on. So here's the scene. If you've ever seen the map of Israel, it's divided into three things. So if, like we're blessed, we live in East Tennessee, the greatest place on the planet. And if you would turn East Tennessee on its side, you can kind of see maybe what Israel would be laid out like. We have the top area, which is Galilee. That'd be our East Tennessee, maybe. And we have this middle area, which is Samaria, or Middle Tennessee, if you're thinking of Tennessee. And then we have this lower area, the bottom area of Israel, called Judea. So you can imagine that. And Jesus is heading down to Judea, this lower region. He's going to Jerusalem, which is where Judea is, but he has to travel down there because we're miles and miles away from that now, somewhere on the border between Galilee and Samaria. So what's going to happen, he's setting the stage for us, is Jesus is doing what most Jewish people would do, and he would travel across the Jordan River, and he would come down the west side, and he would cross back over into Jerusalem because most Jewish people would not go into Samaria. I don't know if you knew that or not. The Jews did not love the Samaritans. If you've ever heard of the story of the Good Samaritan, that in itself to the Jews would be like this inconsistency. How do you have a good Samaritan? Because the Jews did not like Samaritans. They viewed them as like these half-breed, half-hearted Jews, these people that are part Jewish and part pagan that really shouldn't be in their land, and they're just staking out right in the middle of their property. They're squatters. They tried to worship God, but they didn't really know how to worship God, so they kind of perverted the worship of God. The Jews are very religious people, and they don't want anybody messing with their religion or messing up their religion. So they viewed this whole people group as a group of sinners who were less than, who maybe would never have a shot or a chance at God because they weren't like them. Isn't that crazy? And here we have Jesus, and he's taken the usual route, but he's doing it in a very unusual way. See, most Jewish people wouldn't bob back and forth between Galilee and Samaria. They would avoid it altogether, and they would come out, never getting close to the border, and they would come down, and then they would go back across to avoid the whole area. But what Jesus was doing is he's like weaving this border together, crossing back and forth between Galilee and Samaria. And I love that because here we have the most likely place for Jesus to be, Galilee, the place where he started his ministry and fulfilled a lot of his ministry. And then we have the most unlikely place for Jesus to be, Samaria, this place that most Jews wouldn't go. And I love what Luke is telling us even in the geography today. That whether you consider yourself the most likely person for Jesus to speak to this morning or the least likely person for Jesus to speak to this morning or somebody in between, that Jesus is going to speak to us this morning. That we can trust today that Jesus doesn't care who you are or where you come from or what you've done or what you've been. And this morning that Jesus has a word for you, that he wants to speak to you this morning. And if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be here, to be honest with you. I believe that nobody's too far gone, nobody's too far out of the way, that nobody's messed up too bad, that Jesus has a word today for everybody. And it doesn't matter how likely it is in your brain or your story, God wants to move in your life. And Luke's just sharing that through even the geography of Luke chapter 17. I love that. And he says that Jesus was traveling to Jerusalem, and he passed between Samaria and Galilee, kind of weaving these borders together. And in 12, it says, as he entered a village, 10 men stood with a serious skin disease. So here's also what's going on, right? Here's Jesus traveling to Jerusalem. He's weaving back and forth in between, and he stops at a village. Now, if you're like me, you're a details person. Anybody a details person? Like, I want to know the name of the village. I want to know the population of the village. I want to know the geography of the village. I want to know, like, what the plants were in the village. I want to know what they ate in the village. Like, that's me. I'm weird. I Google everything because I want to know, like, down to the detail. I want to know, like, what the sand feels like on your feet in this village. Like, that's me. Okay, I'm weird. Nobody else. But it doesn't give us any of that. We don't know which village, which side of the border he ended up on. We have no idea if he's in Galilee or he's in Samaria. It doesn't tell us because to Luke it doesn't matter. If we knew, we'd probably go build some kind of church there, and we'd all think that was the only place you could worship. And, we're just weird ritualistic people like that. But he tells us, like, he goes in a village. Just as likely it's on either side of the border. Just as likely that he'd speak to any of these people. We don't know because it doesn't matter. It says he entered this village, but when he enters this village, he sees something. There's these 10 men, and these 10 men have a serious skin disease, and they came out to meet him. But as he comes into this village, there's 10 men, and these men have a serious skin disease, and the skin disease would be what we would know as leprosy. These guys were lepers, and you're like, well, how do you know that? Well, if you look right up above verse 11, it says the 10 lepers. So I'm, a researcher, and that was really hard to find, but it's there. These guys had leprosy, and they came out to meet Jesus. And you may think that's weird, but I don't really think that's weird because these 10 men, had leprosy. They had a skin disease. They had a problem, an affliction that who knows how long they've had it, who knows how long they've been dealing with it, who knows how long they've suffered with it. Maybe it was a couple days. Probably it's been years and years and years. Some of these guys have maybe dealt with this most of their life. And when you have leprosy in this culture, you're not normal. You're not treated as normal. You're not looked at as normal. You don't get to do normal things. You don't get to go normal places. You don't even get to live in the village with everybody else. To have leprosy in this culture is to be a cast out, and you get abandoned by your family and your friends. Everything that you would know, everything that you would love, you are now disqualified from. Can you imagine, you have something wrong with you, and everybody that should love you and care about you has now just, cast you out? See, the society and the religion of the day had determined that if you have this, you have to go out. You're unclean. You can't be around people. You're not like other people. You aren't worthy of love. You aren't worthy of affection. You aren't worthy of physical touch from somebody that's not like you. So these men would have to live outside of the city. And at this point in the game, they probably dealt with that for a lot of their life. And they're in a very hopeless state. But they've heard about this man named Jesus. Somehow, some way, they've heard about this man named Jesus. And I guarantee you they've heard a couple amazing things about him. One is he teaches like nobody else teaches. But if you have leprosy, you probably don't really care about that. What you don't want is a teacher. You want a hug. What you don't want is a teacher. You want normal. What you don't want is a teacher. You want to feel loved. You don't need somebody to come out in the woods and quote scripture to you. You need somebody to care about you. And they've heard about Jesus, and they've heard that Jesus looks at people that have never walked before. Still blows my mind. I know that you maybe heard it and read it and you know it and you're like, it doesn't affect you. But can you imagine Jesus just walking up to somebody who's never walked before? Not one day in their whole life, looking at him, and he doesn't have to touch him. He doesn't have to do anything. He doesn't have to do some kind of special dance or some kind of special prayer. He looks at him and he's like, hey, get up, roll up that bed because you don't need it anymore, and walk. And then they do it. Anybody can say it, but the proof's kind of in the pudding, right? Not everybody can do it. And Jesus looks at guys who have never walked before, and he says, hey, get up and walk. And they're like, you know what? That's a great idea. I've never thought about that. And they get up, and they roll up their bed, and they start walking around. These lepers have heard that story. And when you're a leper and you have a serious skin disease that nobody can do anything about, you're not that far removed from a guy who can't walk and nobody can do anything about. Jesus has looked at people who have never seen before and just touches their eyes, and then their eyes are opened and they can see. And they've heard these stories. I know we're like, yeah, I know, I've heard it, I've read it. But what an amazing thing that is. That Jesus came to earth and he opened eyes that have never seen before. Can you imagine? I know some people that can't see. What an amazing day it would be for them if somebody just walked up and just touched their eyes and they can see again. I know people that can't walk, and they would love it if somebody would just walk up in the room today and say, hey, you know what? You don't need the wheelchair. We look at it as ordinary because we've read it over and over and over again, but it's really extraordinary, isn't it, that Jesus can do these things? And they've never seen anything like that, but they've heard the stories. They've heard how Jesus can do amazing things. Jesus is interrupting funerals at this point in time in the ministry. He's walking up to graves where people are already wrapped up and buried. Everybody's given up on the situation. They're dead in a tomb. And he just speaks into the tomb and he's like, hey, you don't have to be dead anymore. Rise, get up and walk. And they're like, you know what? It's a great idea. I don't need to be dead anymore. And they just get up and they walk. That's an amazing thing. And these lepers, these guys with a skin disease who aren't dead yet, and who can still walk and who can still see, they look at that and they're like, they were hopeless, but Jesus came. And they were hopeless, but Jesus came. And they were hopeless, but Jesus came. I'm hopeless. And I heard he's coming my way. So when they heard that Jesus was coming their way, they're like, I'm going to go out and meet this guy. I'm going to see him. Isn't that crazy? Like they heard a story of what Jesus can do, and somewhere in the story, hope rose up in their heart, and they were like, I got to meet this guy. Side note, it still works the same today. It still works the same. There's a world full of people that are just looking for a hug. There's a world full of people that are looking for somebody to look at them and say, you're valuable, you're loved, you're worthy. There's a world full of people looking for that. There's a world full of people today who feel hopeless and lost and alone, and they feel like nobody cares. And they're looking for somebody to just bring some hope and say, you're not lost and you're not alone. They're looking for that. But here's the crazy thing. We who were lepers and who can't walk and who couldn't see and who were dead, we don't tell stories of what Jesus can do. We tell people about the song set or what kind of music we sing or what kind of clothes we wear or what kind of building we worship in. We tell people about the programs that we have. Nobody cares about programs, and nobody cares about music, and nobody cares about how good or good your preacher is not. Nobody cares if he's funny. Hopeless people want hope. And when hopeless people learn, oh my gosh, they were dead and now they're not. Oh my gosh, they felt worthless and now they feel worthy. Hopeless people think, maybe if it worked for them, it'll work for me. And that's what we see over and over and over and over and over again in the story. But what church people offer is church stories. I got a good church. My preacher's really funny. I love it when I ask somebody how their preacher is, and the first thing they tell me is, man, they're really funny. Who cares? How do they teach? What are they offering? Where's the hope? That's what I want to know. Amen. I don't care if they can tell a joke. I don't care if they can tell a story. It's probably better if they don't. Let's just stick to the word. We need Jesus stories in the church and in lives today. We need to learn to have spiritual conversations again, because people need to hear that there is a God who moves and works and acts. People need to know that we were dead in our trespasses and sins, but we aren't anymore. We weren't loved. We weren't a people, but now we are loved and we are a people. That's what people need, and we see it over and over and over again in the stories. So it's no mystery today. These men who were hopeless heard that somebody's coming and they're bringing hope. And what did they do? They went out and they're like, I got to meet this guy. I got to see this guy. I don't know if he can change me. I don't know if he even will. I don't know if he cares anything about me, but I'm going to find out. So these 12 men with a serious skin disease, they came out and they met him. And it says, here's how it started. They stood at a distance.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Siri wants to talk to you. She did that last week too, and I just said, you didn't catch it, but whatever. I need to not bring her to church. Remind me of that next week. But it says they stood at a distance. These men come out, and they didn't run right up to Jesus. We invite people to church, and they don't run right up to Jesus, and we give up. They're going to check him out first, right? So these men, they come out, and they didn't come right up to Jesus. They stood at a distance, and it says they raised their voices, and they began to say, or let's just put it this way, pray, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. They began to shout, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Now, I love that. It's not a super complex prayer, is it? You hear any King James English in that prayer? I did not. They didn't speak English, let alone King James English. Thou, thee, thy. None of that. It was plain English because these people were plain people. They just spoke what they knew. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't long. It wasn't ritualistic. It's just, Jesus, that's your name, right? Master, that's what I've heard about you. Have mercy on us. This is never anything we've heard lepers shout before, because normally lepers would roam around the city shouting this: unclean, unclean. Can you imagine if you had to go to the mall and yell unclean so people didn't come near you? That was their life. Just roamed around outside of town because people couldn't come into their space, into their presence, and they would just shout, unclean, 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 all day long. That's the story of their life. I'm unclean. I have a skin disease. You can't come near me. I'm not worthy. I'm not loved. I'm not good. Nobody cares. And they would just shout it all day long. That was their story. And then Jesus stepped into the room and just by chance, just casting the die. If you can help me, help me. It wasn't a specific prayer. Hey, I need you to get rid of my type 2B, leprosy. Just, I need mercy. Whatever that looks like. I'm not asking for specifics. I'm just asking for help. And they just shout out with whatever they got because they can't do anything and nobody else can do anything, but maybe this guy can do something. And then Jesus, it says he sees them. I love it when he says that. Like, you know, this is not the first time Jesus noticed 10 guys standing out in front of a city. But in this moment, he like looked beyond 10 guys standing out in front of a city, and he like saw them, stared intently at them. He noticed them. He knew what was on their heart. He knew what they needed. And he tells them this. He says, go and show yourselves to the priest. Now, if you're like me, you're like, is that it? Is that all he said? If you're like these guys, you're probably thinking, is that it? Is that all he said? Go and show yourselves to the priest. Now, when we ask Jesus to do something, right, we're looking for like thunder and lightning and the storm to roll in and trumpets from heaven and like glowing light. That's probably what they thought too. He says, go show yourself to the priest. He didn't say, okay, you're clean, don't worry about it. He didn't say any of that, did he? He's like, go show yourself to the priest. Now, you'd be like, what? What? Why? That's not, I want mercy. That's not necessarily what I'm asking for. I don't need to go to church. I just need some mercy. Like, they say, go show yourself to the priest. Now, when you hear this, if you're a leper, there's a little bit of dread that probably follows along with that, because how you get declared a leper is to show yourself to the priest. The priest has already wrote them off. You ain't good. You're a sinner, cursed by God. You're afflicted. You did something wrong, and this is the punishment for that. You're unclean. Go out there. Don't come around people. And Jesus says, go show yourself to the priest. My thought would be, I've already done that, and they already said that I wasn't good and I wasn't clean. Like, I'm looking for you to come over here and rub some mud on me or, like, dunk me in some kind of bath thing. I want a crazy, amazing miracle. I want something extraordinary, but Jesus just does something pretty ordinary right here. And he says, go show yourself to the priest. Now, luckily, these guys were pretty desperate, so they just do what he says. And it says that while they were going, they were healed. While they were going, they were healed. Now, can you imagine basically what Jesus is saying? He's like, walk like you're healed. Go to the priest right now. The scales aren't going to fall off right now. The miracle's not going to happen right now. The skin disease is not going to be cleaned up right now. Go to the priest, though. They could have just went and been like, well, I know what he's going to say. Still got it. But Jesus looks at him and he's like, go ahead and walk like you're healed. I heard you. Walk like you're healed. Most of us, we'd be like, can't, not equipped for that, not what I ask for, not what I'm looking for. But Jesus says, hey, I'm going to ask you to stretch out in faith a little bit today. I'm not going to bring the mud in, spit on it, rub it on your skin. I'm not going to look at you and say scales fall off and the scales are going to fall off. I've heard your prayer. Now walk like I've heard your prayer. Go show the priest. Walk like you're healed. And it says, as they were going, then the miracle began happening. They're already headed back to the priest. They're already going to the temple, right? They're already going in there prepared to be like, hey, here's my skin disease. Just write me off again, do the thing again. They're going back to the guy. But as they're going, Jesus is working. He's doing something in them. And as they're going, they're being healed. And since 15, it says, but one of them seeing that he was healed, one of them noticed. One of them, as they were walking like they were healed, began to notice that they were in fact healed. And it says that he returned, and with a loud voice he gave glory to God. He came back to Jesus. 1 out of the 10 notice God is doing something right now. I asked him for mercy. He told me to go to the priest. And while I was walking towards the priest, I looked down and realized that he was working while I was walking. That's a pretty amazing truth today. And he looked down at his skin and he began to notice, I am healed. And the thing that clipped through his mind was not, I better follow all the rules and go to the priest and do the thing. And I'm too busy for this. He immediately goes back, overcome and overwhelmed, because Jesus is actually done what he asked him to do. He returns, he comes back, and it says, as he come back with a loud voice, he gave glory to God. What does that mean? He worshiped. When he noticed he was healed, he worshiped. When he saw the miracle that God had done while he was walking, he began to worship. I love that. When he noticed that he was healed and heard, he began to worship. He began to shout. And the amazing thing is, everybody that's ever seen this guy had probably heard him shout before, but they've never heard him shout like this before. See, the story that he'd been shouting for years is, I'm not good enough. I'm not clean. I'm unclean. Don't come near me. I'm not worthy. I'm not loved. And now it's something different. It's, look what God has done. I'm not good, but look what God has done. I'm unclean, but look what God has done. I was a leper, but God changed it. He changed the leprosy. I don't have it anymore. And he begins to run back and he worships. And the thing that he worships with is the story of who he used to be and what God done in that story. That's worship today. I just want you to know that, because some of us got it confused. We think worship is the right moment and the right song when we get the little tickle up the spine, and that tells us to shout or we raise our hand. That is not worship today. It's something we do while we worship today. The songs help us tell our story today, but worship is greater than that. Worship's something bigger than that. Worship is this. I was this, but now I'm this because God has done it in me. Worship is taking what I was and using it as a weapon to declare the glory of God. And that's what this guy does. He comes back and he's like, I was a leper, but this guy has healed me. And he comes back and he runs back and he's shouting this story. He's telling the glory of God and what God has done in his life. And it says he fell down at his feet. This guy has not been allowed to have human contact from normal people in how long? And the first human contact that he gets is not hugging his family or seeing the priest. It's falling up next to Jesus' feet. He comes and the first thing he does is falls at the feet of Jesus. He's not been able to get within like a radius of people, probably 30 foot or more. And how long? And he doesn't go in for the hug, he goes in for the feet. He bows humbly in worship at the feet. See, worship is this. It's declaring what God has done in our life and then getting close to the feet. It's a posture of humility. It's a posture of this guy's greater than me and I just want to get close. And it says he fell down at his feet and he began to thank him. And here is the news flash. And he was a Samaritan. I don't know what the other 9 guys were. Maybe they were all Samaritans. I don't know. But here is the least likely guy in the story. If Jesus was only going to heal a couple people, we would assume this guy would get left out. But here is a guy who the culture says you're counted out by God. You can't come near God. God doesn't care anything about you. You're some pagan crazy, and you'll never be healed, and you'll never be heard. And yet here he is, heard and healed in the story of God. And you're like, why does that matter? Because some of us listening today, maybe in this room, maybe not, have heard that we are counted out from the story of God. Some of us have heard that from religious people, church people. Some of us have heard it from ourselves, but we've heard and we've believed this lie that God doesn't love us, he doesn't care about us, that somehow grace is for everybody else and it's not for us, and that is not true. God came for the least likely, and here is another example of that. Here's a guy who's a Samaritan who never should have been in the story, but now is up close and personal to Jesus. Heaven is open today for all of us. The gospel today is for all of us. And it says this man fell down at his feet and he began to thank him. He was a Samaritan. And here's what Jesus says back to this guy. Jesus said, were not 10 cleansed? Just like, I think I remember 10 of you guys. I counted, and there were 10. Didn't I heal everybody? What we get here is that this guy's not the only guy that got healed. All 10 of these guys got healed. Were not 10 cleansed. Jesus admits that. I cleaned 10 of you guys. There are 10 guys who are reformed lepers who were here and now are not here. They're all clean. Where are the other 9? Where are the other 9 guys at? Didn't any return to give glory to God except this foreigner? Didn't anybody come back to worship except this guy who was the farthest away? Translation. Where are the other 10? I cleaned 10 people. Only one came back to worship, and he was the guy who was farthest away. Wow. Wow. The guy who, by the books, was the most hopeless, that's the guy who's up here worshiping today. The guy who, by the books, was the farthest away, that's the guy who's up here worshiping today. The guy who, by the books, was the least likely to get healed and heard by God, that's the guy that's up here worshiping today. The other 9, I don't know where they are. I don't know where they are. I can't explain to you, it doesn't tell in the story, right, where the other 9 guys went. I assume they went to the priest. They went in. Look at this. What do you think? And the priest said, oh, you're clean. That's amazing. But they didn't come back to worship. They were clean. They were heard and they were healed, but they never returned to say thank you. They never came back to worship. They came to Jesus for what they could get, but they never came back to give. And I can tell you today, I don't know where those 10 guys were, or those 9 guys were. I don't know if maybe they just were too busy. I got to go to the priest. I got to go to the priest. I got to get here. I got to show him this. I don't know. I don't know if maybe because they didn't feel that far away, they just didn't feel like Jesus didn't owe it to them. I feel like sometimes that's the struggle with us. We were raised in church and we just feel like we don't owe him anything. It's not a big deal to us. I don't know. I have no idea. But what I know is that apparently the proper way to react when you're heard and healed is to shout the story of the glory of God. And to get up as close as you can get humbly in the presence of God. See, worship is not a group of songs that we sing. It's a posture. It's a posture. We come into the presence of God and we get as close as we can get and we just begin to say, man, I was this, but now I'm this. And it's not because of me, it's because of you. I was this, but now I'm this, and I didn't do anything to get here. It's because of you. It's turning all that back. I can't believe what's happened here. I was a leper, but now I'm clean, and it's all because of you. So I'm going to tell anybody that'll hear, I was a leper. That was me. I was the guy. I want you to know my history. I want you to know my past. I want you to know where I came from, because I want you to know today where I stand, where I am. It's not not because of me. It's not because of church. It's not some book. It's not some program. It's not something. It's because I've come into the presence of God. I heard stories of Jesus, and I got close enough one day that He's healed me. He heard me, and He healed me. That's worship today. It's turning it back towards Him. It's not coming to church. If you think worship is coming to church, you're confused. The other 9 guys, they went to church. Look how good I look. Worship is the one guy who's, I'm not too busy. I'm not too good. I'm coming back today to share the story of God's glory. Everybody has to hear today. It's not because of what I've done. It's because of what He's done. I'm pointing at that guy. Worship's not a formula today. It's not some, when we get to the bridge, if it's a song that I like, if it's a new one, because I've heard that one so many other times, I'll raise my hand. Worship is, oh my gosh, I was dead, but now I'm alive. Oh my gosh, I was a leper. I was unclean. I was filthy. I was dirty, but look at where God has brought me to. And I'm not where I'm headed. I'm not where I'm going, but I'm getting as close as I can get today. I just want to snuggle up close to the feet of Jesus. I want to get right up in the presence today, as close as I can get. I'm not going to just sing the songs. I'm getting close. I'm not just going to react when I get to the bridge. I'm getting close. I'm not just going to raise my hands today. I'm getting close. I want everybody to know what this guy has done for me. It's not about what I like. Worship songs were never written for you. Worship songs were never written for you. The bridge isn't for you. The chorus isn't for you. New or old, it doesn't matter. It's not about you. Worship intrinsically is about somebody greater than you. It doesn't matter if you like it. It doesn't matter if it touches you. Worship is this. I was a leper and now I'm healed. Look at that guy. That's why when we worship, we lift our hands towards heaven. Look at somebody greater than me. Look at somebody above me. That's why we worship. We bow sometimes. There's somebody greater than me. It's this posture of humility where I say, it's not about me. It's about Him, and He's done something amazing in me. And I wonder how many of us each week are so busy going to church that we forget to come back and say, thank you. So busy singing the songs, we forget to come back and say, thank you. We're so busy listening to the message, we forget to come back and say, thank you. We're so busy thinking it's about us, we forget to come back and say, thank you. It's about you. It's about you. It's about what you've done. And we reach out again and again and again in this truth that I was dead, but now I'm alive. And I wonder today if anybody's here that will say, that's me. I was dead, but now I'm alive. Where are the worshipers at? Where are the other 9? I wonder today if anybody will say, I was living in brokenness, but now He's made me whole. Where are the worshipers at? I wonder today who will say, God has saved my marriage. It was falling apart, but now I'm here to say thank you. I didn't do a thing, but He done everything. Where are the worshipers at? I wonder today who will say, I was caught in addiction. I was living in it. I was drowning in it. I was drowning in a substance or a thing or a person, but God has changed me and redeemed me and rescued me. Where are the worshipers at? I don't want that to be the question while I'm sitting in church today, singing songs and listening to messages. I want to get as close to God as I can get in these moments. And sometimes to get close to Him, we got to get down. We got to realize that He didn't owe me a thing. You know why I'm saved today? It's not because I went to church. I need somebody to amen that. You know why I'm saved today? It's not because I said the right prayer. Why I'm saved today? It's not because I figured it all out. I was dead. That's as hopeless as we can get today. But Jesus stepped into my city. And He moved where I couldn't move. And now I'm alive. And I'm not wasting another moment being too busy to come and to worship Him. I'm not wasting another moment being too busy to just do the job. I'm not wasting another moment being too busy just to come in and do the thing and to go through the ritual. I don't want God to ask over me today, where are the worshipers at? I don't want him to look at me and say, where are the other 9? Did I not heal you? Did I not save you? Did I not pull you out of death into life? Did I not rescue you from addiction? Did I not save your family? Did I not save your marriage? Did I not save your home when everything was falling apart and you called out to me? Didn't I come through? Didn't I heal your sickness? Didn't I heal your disease? I'm not wasting another moment letting God say over me, where are you at? I come to worship. And this morning, maybe we find ourselves in a position where we're like, man, I don't know what you're talking about. That's great, but I'm living in darkness today. I'm still in the everything's falling apart. I'm still in the, I don't know what's going on. I'm still in the depression and the confusion and the anxiety and maybe the addiction. I'm still living in that. And what I would say to you today is the resurrection power is enough. You need to call out to God, and then you need to walk like you're healed, because he is faithful and he is good, and he will work today while you're walking. If you take a step towards God, he will take a step towards you. He will work today in your life while you're walking. You lift your head up and you walk towards heaven today, and God, Jesus, will do something in your life in these moments. Church, today we got to get into the posture of pointing to something greater than us. I don't want to be a church where Jesus just lifts up the roof and says, where are the worshipers at? But I want to come back over and over and over and over again to the feet of Jesus. And for anybody that'll listen, I want to say, thank